When thinking about shading techniques, there's a couple different ways that you can get ink into the skin. Starting with our first technique, it's going to be the pendulum style. Pendulum style is going to be a lot like when you're lining, essentially going in and out of the skin in that airplane motion. Always starting off with a little bit of tattoo balm. Go ahead and start in that first square. That pendulum style, moving in and out of the skin, easing in and out. Now, if you look closer into where we did the pendulum style, you're going to see the center is going to be the most saturated point, and around our edges is going to be the more faded in and faded out. The reason being is, of course, if you're entering and exiting the skin in more of that pendulum motion, you're going to be putting less ink into the skin and at a more shallow point. Now moving to our second box, we're going to be starting with whip shading technique. Whip shading technique is where you're going to be starting in the skin at a 90-degree angle and pulling or pushing at whatever direction. So you're going to be having more saturation at that starting point and then pushing out for that gradient. Starting in the skin and pushing out. Depending on what saturation you're needing, you can go ahead and go over that point as many times as you need. I try to do 3 and under enter and exits of the skin. Now, if you look closer, you can see where we entered the skin, going in at that 90-degree angle and pushing out is going to be the most saturation to least saturation at our exit point. When you are exiting the skin, you do still want to slightly lift up and out of the skin, and you don't want to go too fast, just depending on how much saturation you are needing. Now moving on to mag shading. The differences between mags is you're going to have your curved mag and your normal mag. Your normal mag, you're going to have all of the rows at the same exact entering point and height. Your curved, you will be what it seems like curved. So when you are working with a curved mag, you can see with something like here, it's going to be a lighter gradient right on that corners versus a flat mag. You will have full saturation at each enter and exit point right here on those tips. So I'm going to show you a little bit with that curved mag, what that looks like. Here I'm just using circular motions. And you can see right at those edges that you're going to be lighter versus a little bit darker right in that center. Now, if you're using something like a normal mag, that would be solid all the way throughout. Now let's talk about color packing. Color packing is going to be circular motions at a very tight form. So essentially all you're going to be doing is moving at a circular motion, lapping those in a formation of 3. So what that means is we'll throw a little bit of stencil stuff, a little ink, and you're going to be moving at 1, 2, 3. Then moving 50% over and onto your next section and going in 3s. is going to be better for higher saturation just because that needle is going to be getting into the skin more times, therefore pushing in more ink into the skin. Now you can see with those circular motions that it's packed in a lot more ink versus something like over here, we're going to have a higher gradient. Those circular motions are going to be going over and more saturation in the skin. So anytime that you're thinking of filling in an area of complete black, that circular motion color packing will be the best motion for your shading technique to choose. Now let's talk about texturizing. Texturizing, one method that I like to use is what I call random eights. And what I mean by that is going in that circular 8 motion. So what that means is quite literally an 8. So you're just going to be going in little 8s randomly wherever you feel. And adding in more texture. Now, if you're also wanting to do texture as well, something like dotting or speckle shading, which is going to be if you slow your machine down and you're going to drag that needle across the skin, and it's going to quite literally skip across the skin, giving you a dotting technique. Now, if you're using something like a bug pen, you're going to get more of a smooth gradient throughout, but that is using a 7 liner just to kind of show you what that looks like. Here are 2 texturizing methods, dotting and random 8s. You can also use them in combination of each other depending on what type of gradient or what type of shading that you're wanting. You can even overlap them. So let's see what that looks like. Let's add that random 8 on top. From there, you can tell the combination of layering both depending on your desired effect of what you're wanting. If you just are wanting a couple dotting, speckling, and then adding the random 8s on top, you're going to get more saturation. From there, you can layer the techniques depending on what your desired shading effect is, but then you can kind of see it does add in a little bit more texture. Now, if you're wanting to be more deliberate about your shading and dotting, I always suggest going in 3s. So 1, 2, 3, almost at that triangle effect. The more that you do that in the area and kind of just adding it at 3s, you can be more intentional at having that randomness feel, more realistic feel, instead of going along and trying to fill in that amount of space with random dottings. You'll end up having it look a little bit more like you purposely did it, which is not the point of realism. Realism is you want it to look natural, so therefore, if you go a little bit more random with it in that little 3 dot technique, you'll get something more realistic that's buildable as well.